You're on mute.
Hey guys, this is Ashley and this is my co-host Shawn Hickman. And this is the Liberty Roundtable, where 4 panelists from all political backgrounds discuss our hot topic of the month. And I apologize for the delays, but obviously we're on Muddy Water Media, so I don't need to explain.
And we'll be hosting the Liberty Roundtable once a month here on Muddy Water Media. We're going to release our topic and panel list prior to the airing date. That will allow anchor call-ins with your questions for the panel pertaining to the topic. Our topic tonight, in lieu of current events, is foreign policy and non-intervention.
At the end of our show, we will discuss the charitable aspect of the Liberty Roundtable, but let's jump right in and meet our panel. We have David Lilley, the host of Pardon Will podcast.
Cajun Libertarian of the Cajun Libertarian podcast, and from Igloos to Bayous, right here on Muddied Water Media.
And Bootleg Libertarian from Not a Real Libertarian Network.
Heyo.
And the 2020 Libertarian Vice President candidate and Muddy Water Media host, Spike Cohen. How's our panel doing tonight?
We're good, thank you.
Good to go.
Doing well.
Well, let's jump right into it. Our topic tonight is foreign policy and non-intervention. Panel, here we are 20 years after the tragic events of September 11. What have we learned in the last 2 decades waging the war on terror? We'd like to hear from each of you. Chris, what are your thoughts?
20 years, we've learned an awful lot about our own government, from the lengths of which they're willing to go to cover a narrative. But as far as foreign policy, I don't think we've learned anything new. We've learned the same things we've always known, is that the more involved we get, the worse it becomes long term. You just look in Afghanistan after 20 years. That's where I'll stop with that.
How about you, Cajun? What would you add to that?
I would say as a citizenry, right? Not somebody who is a part of the upper echelon of the power apparatus that is our government, military industrial complex. If you look back to the language of when this war first started, it was all centered on the idea that we were not in the business of nation building. And then we immediately got into the business of nation building. So what they do is they lie and they set a precedent and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And then they just go off and do the exact same thing that they said that they weren't going to do. And here we are 20 years later. We've given Afghanistan back to the Taliban. We've lost far more American lives than we did on 9/11 just from being in Afghanistan. And so what have we learned? We've learned that we've wasted many lives and we've wasted trillions of dollars to effectively change nothing but kill a couple of terrorists that may or may have not had an impact on us at all.
Well said. David, how about you? What would you add to that?
I think when it comes to the government learning its lesson, I don't know if that technically has happened, but I definitely think the citizenry has definitely learned a ton over the last 20 years. I think the examples that we've gotten just watching our foreign policy over, in the last 10 says a lot about people starting to wake up and realizing our play in the world and our role. Yep. So I think the citizenry has definitely learned a lot more than they did. I think the average American probably has a little bit more knowledge on foreign policy than they did 15, maybe 20, definitely 30 years ago. That's what I'll say.
Spike, what would you add to that?
So it's like David just said, I don't think government's going to learn its lesson. And I don't think government's going to learn its lesson because it's stupid. It's because government knew what this would be and what this would do. The invasion of Afghanistan and certainly the invasion of Iraq and the entire war on terror has absolutely nothing to do with Al-Qaeda or 9/11. They were just looking for the first pretext that they could possibly find to do all of those things and to continue on with the things that they're continuing to do. Not just the wars overseas in Afghanistan, but also the Patriot Act and I know we're focusing on foreign policy, but all of the draconian and tyrannical and oppressive things that they did in response to ostensibly in response to 9/11, they knew full well it would never be used for to actually stop the terrorists. That wasn't what was going to happen. And whether you buy the narrative of that the government was involved in 9/11 or knew it was going to happen and did nothing, or if you buy their official narrative, which is that terrorists who were upset about decades of U.S. imperialist foreign policy and who saw an opportunity to attack Americans and make them feel that pain, even if that the accepted official version is what's true, then that just drives home the fact that this imperial war policy will lead to that backlash and will cause that to happen. Specific to Afghanistan, what did we learn? I can tell you, who started as a neocon shortly, really in the events of 9/11, and who completely cheerled everything that was going on in Afghanistan and elsewhere for several years. I watched what older people and wiser people than me told me would happen, that we would find out all the lies that led to us going there, that we would find out that there was no need to have gone there in the first place, and that even if there was, that the way it was done poorly, intentionally so, and that we would probably end up just leaving the Taliban stronger, better armed, better equipped, better funded, and lo and behold, that's exactly what has happened. And this is what government does with everything. Either create a crisis or make it worse, or just stand by befuddled while it happens. Use the existence of that crisis to push for more control, more wars, more powers, more taxes, more debt spending, more bailouts, more everything, and make you pay for it in every way that they possibly can. When that fails or makes it worse, grandstand on the suffering that it creates and push for even more control. I know I've talked more than everyone else, but that's what I get from Afghanistan.
Oh boy, thank you for that. The other question that I have here is the decision to pass the AUMF in 2001, giving war powers to the president. It's still in place, and considering that the AUMF from 1957 is still in place, is there any hope of repealing this ever? Spike, why don't you take the first crack at that?
Not while Republicans and Democrats are in charge. Because we saw the anti-war left, right? That the strongest anti-war movement we saw during the Bush years, which was entirely a fiction. It was a way of, they knew that there would be people that would be against the wars, and they had to give them a space to feel like they were fighting back against it. And so what did they do? They took all of that momentum and pushed it behind John Kerry, one of the most pro-war senators in the Senate, who voted against Iraq before he voted, or voted for Iraq, the war in Iraq, before he voted against it. Nonsense. But that was what they did. That was the strongest. That was the high watermark for the anti-war movement, and it was completely co-opted in a similar way that the movement for police accountability was co-opted last year. But anyway, that co-opted into supporting people who were 100% behind the thing that they were protesting against, and they knew it. So, going back to, the question of the AUMF, you're going to get rope-a-doped until you stop accepting it. The con ends when we stop getting conned. The only party or parties that I know of that have any real organizational ability are the Libertarian Party and, to a lesser extent, the Green Party. They're the only ones that are always anti-war. They don't pretend to be anti-war if that's politically popular. They don't play the good cop, bad cop routine with the other party while they work together to screw us all over and pretend that they're worst of enemies when they're best of friends. It's not going to happen with Republicrats in charge. It's going to take sweeping the deck and putting people in who in all ways respect the fact that you own yourself, that you shouldn't have these things imposed upon you, that your loved ones shouldn't be sent overseas to fight, to kill and die for terror groups and foreign dictators and central bankers and crony businesses, the military industrial complex, that only will end when we get rid of people who are okay with that. So and when that happens, yes, then we'll get rid of all the AUMFs at once.
Awesome.
Hey guys, I'm hoping you can at least hear my audio. My video is totally crapped out, but Chris, let me hear from you on the AUMF.
Yeah, on the AUMF, and I was actually just pulling up the actual bill right here. The problem is this. So the problem with this AUMF is the same problem we have with all government bills, anything. It's so incredibly vague. I'll read the exact wording here. It's in section 2, and it says that the president is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001. And with that wording alone, you could determine that Somali pirates had something to do with 9/11. So do we invade Somalia again? It's so vague. Do we assume that the Chinese had something to do with it? Do we invade China next? The problem is the verbiage that is used by the federal government is so vague intentionally that they can justify whatever means they want to. I mean, by that definition, you could say that the Russians had aided in Afghanistan while we were there, so therefore we should invade Russia. We should go to war with Russia. By that pure definition, right? The Taliban, we went after the Taliban because they aided Al Qaeda, who was Bin Laden was in charge of Al Qaeda, who was being aided by the Taliban. Well, the Russians aided the Taliban. It never ends. It's a continuous cycle. They find these vagaries, or these they create these vagaries. I shouldn't even say they find them. They create these vagaries and use them against the detriment of the citizens of the United States and the world. So the problem becomes, once again, we have to start holding people accountable for the words that they use in this legislation. And no, it will never be repealed for this very simple reason that we had 3 presidents come and go through entire terms that used it to do whatever bidding they want. Obama used it in Syria, Libya. I mean, you pick a nation that has a GDP that's lower than most U.S. states, and that's where we could use it. That's exactly where they'll use it, and they'll use it to make their friends and themselves rich.
Yep. Noel, what are your thoughts on the AUMF?
No chance. No chance it gets repealed. Like Spike said, not with the duopoly in charge. I give you just a little validation towards that. As long as politicians are being paid by lobbyist corporatists and defense contractors and weapons contractors, no chance. None. And it's vague for a reason. Like Chris says, vague for a reason. There's a reason. If you go look at the White House definition of what domestic terrorism is, it's not defined. It's not defined. So keep paying attention to that, because that's raining down soon as they start labeling everybody that's just not going to fall right in line with their language as domestic terrorists. It's vague for a reason, and no, as long as they're getting paid by defense contractors and weapons contractors, no chance. None.
David, do you think the very vague AUMF will be repealed?
Yeah, I'm kind of with everybody in this boat. I don't think it will. I definitely don't think it will on a certain. I think when it comes to the American people, this idea, I mean, should it be repealed, then absolutely. But I think once you let the genie out of the bottle, and we all say this, like we all know this concept, once you give the government this particular authority, the chances of getting that back are slim to none, if anything. Right. And so, but there's something else about that. I don't know if the majority of Americans want that. I understand that they don't like war, but I don't know, because the tactic of having this in place is the idea of fear. Like, we all know this. So we all saw the TSA like being inducted with the Patriot Act, and now you can't go on a plane unless you take your shoes off. These are things that people feel, I mean, whether or not it's theater or not, they feel comfortable with it. And so the AUMF is a little bit of a warm blanket to Americans when they go, well, there's a terrorist around every corner. And if that hasn't hyped up in the last 20 years, I don't know what has, because the only thing that we've really gotten out of this government is you should be afraid. Like, you should be afraid because there's a boogeyman behind everything. And there's always going to be a boogeyman. And then if we don't stop this one boogeyman, and then when we do, mission accomplished, oh, hey, there's another one. And so is it going to be repealed? Most likely not. Do Americans want it to be repealed? I don't know. I don't know if the average American understands that concept of being, because what is the risk if it does? What all of a sudden, I know I'm going long, but the world has gotten bigger, not because it's gradually in size, but because the internet's around, and so information's gotten a little bit more drastic. We have the world inside of our hands and our pockets. So when it comes to threats are immediate. It doesn't take 3 months for the king to send a decree of threat over boat. We know threats that happen automatically. And so when it comes to, like, we need to sit down and have a discussion of whether or not this threat is something liable, or whether or not this terrorist is actually going to act on that. People know that there has to be action moved as quick as the internet does. And so when you have a president who has that authority in their arms, people, I think, feel safe of going, well, as soon as something happens, we can drop the ball and go. And we got troops there now because we don't have to wait for Congress to sit down and discuss this over time, or we don't have to wait for a vote from Americans because we need to act now. I think most Americans like that, unfortunately. I definitely think so. Sorry, I went long.
No, that was great, David. Here's our next question. Bringing home the troops is something many Americans have desired. The current administration turned the withdrawal from Afghanistan into a complete disaster. How could that have been done effectively? Do you want to take this one, Chris?
Yeah, I can take this one. And I think I'll have the dissenting opinion maybe on this. I don't think it would have mattered what administration was in power. I don't think it would have mattered who you put in charge of what. I don't think the federal government has the capacity to have done this withdrawal appropriately. I don't. The way the military operates, it takes 32 signatures to issue a pen. It's bureaucracy on top of bureaucracy. So when you need 36 people to sign off on you walking out of a door, there's two things happen. Either one, you do it quick and overnight and it's a mess, or two, it takes about 18 months to do it, and in which case things still happen, but it's much slower speed. Instead of all of it at once, you get it over the course of 18 months. Slower might have been more efficient, and it might have saved lives, but honestly, I don't think so. I think maybe pulling the Band-Aid off was the most effective way to go through it, but there's no administration that I could think of that would have been able to successfully do it without leaving people behind. That's the dirty truth of it. The military is so ineffective at a lot of things it does outside of killing people that it doesn't know how to withdraw. It's been at war for 20 years. The U.S. military has effectively been at war since World War II. Now the UN doesn't actually recognize that we've been at war since World War II, but we have essentially been off and on at war since World War II. And the military doesn't know how to stand down. It doesn't know how to back down. It knows one speed, and that's go in, kill everybody, flatten everything, and leave. But the problem is the leaving part takes about 20 years, and they've still not figured that part out yet.
David, what do you think?
I actually do. I do disagree. I think a toddler probably could have pulled out a little bit better. I don't think it takes a lot. I do agree with Chris. I think the bureaucracy behind the idea of military, like they're good at one thing. They are good at one thing because they're trained to do one thing. But when it comes to pulling out, that's not the military's job. That's politics. Are they good at pulling out? They're great at pulling out if they're commanded right. And so I think the buck has to stop somewhere. And I know this is weird, but Biden did say the buck stopped with him, except for then he tossed it on to a ton of other people. And so that idea of being like, well, could we have done it better? I mean, I'm an idiot. And I think if I would have put a little bit more thought, I might have been able to pull it out. Whether it was faster or slower, I think there's something we don't know that we missed. Because if ripping the Band-Aid off, like either they assumed the Taliban was going to do it anyway, so we're like, well, let's just get out of there because this is going to be a mess regardless. We take our time or we don't, because the Afghanistan government's going to flee anyway. So what do we do? I mean, at least take your luggage with you. Don't leave it on the tarmac. Like burn the luggage. Don't just leave it intact. And so I've got some strong feelings about that. I think anybody leaving one country would at least don't forget your valuables behind. And I think that's where I'll be. I don't have a lot to say on it, but at least that one last one.
Spike, we got a couple different opinions there. What are your thoughts?
So I kind of agree. There are fine people on both sides of this argument. No, listen. Here's what I'll say. Is there a better way to do it? Yeah, of course there was. Like, so I've been asked, because I've criticized Biden and how he did this. And people are like, oh, well, what would you have done? And I'm like, well, that's easy. First, I would have ordered the CIA and State Department to stop funding and giving guns to ISK in northern Afghanistan and to the Haqqani network in Kabul. I would have told them, stop arming the terrorists who, when we leave, are going to try to keep us there by blowing people up and trying to force a situation where we stay there, because their whole bread and butter and lifeblood is us being there forever. So why are you giving them weapons? Stop. They're not going to fight the Taliban, at least not until long after we've left. Stop that. Okay, so cut that out. Next thing we do is I would have immediately, even before I was in office, before I was even inaugurated, I would have already been talking with people about, listen, we have a May deadline that Trump and the Taliban have negotiated out. We're sticking with that. We're not going to unilaterally tell the Taliban, oh, yeah, you know that agreement that we spent months working on, years working on? No, we're just going to unilaterally stay for another 4 months, because that made them antsy and made them not wait till September. And that's why they started, going in and taking over from the Afghan National Army. The other thing I would have done is acknowledge that the Afghan National Army was no such thing. It was a group of people that were getting a paycheck from the U.S. taxpayer. And the minute that stopped, they all put their Taliban hats back on and said, now we're the Taliban. Like, or if they weren't Taliban, there were a handful of people that fought back. And that was it. Like there was no army there, and everyone knew that. I've talked to people who were literally grunts on the ground who came back and said the ANA is a joke. They're not going to be able to do a thing. If they knew it, the experts knew it, so they knew that. The next thing I would have done is begin immediately processing for American civilians first to be coming home, and for our Afghan allies to be able to come. I would have taken the governor of Guam up on his offer to do what we did during Vietnam, put all of the foreign nationals that were processing for asylum into Guam, let them stay there, process them, and if they're allowed to come to the mainland, some of them might stay in Guam, like many of the Vietnamese ended up doing, and they could and do that. When you do just those things, literally just that, now you've gotten rid of all of the tension that led to the Taliban takeover. I would also be talking with the Taliban saying, listen, we have to stick with May, and we want to stick with May. The only way we're going to stick with May is if there isn't any kind of bloodshed or anything that happens. That's the only kind of pushback I'm going to get. Let us go. We're getting the civilians out first, then we're leaving, and then you do whatever you're going to do. We know the ANA is a joke just as much as you do. That's what we're going to do. I'm not a genius, okay? I'm a pretty smart guy. I came up with that just looking at it. Now, is the military actually capable of doing that? Is a bureaucracy that is as big and unwieldy, multi-trillion-dollar organization like the Pentagon that is run by the idiots in Congress and in the White House, are they capable of actually doing something that isn't so fucking stupid that they literally gave a list of the names of the people they didn't want terrorists to kill to the Taliban? No, they're not going to do it because they're morons. Or they're either morons or they're complicit. They want those things to happen because if those things happen, then that's an excuse to stay. That's an excuse to drone bomb a family and make more people join ISK and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who then attack U.S. interests in Afghanistan and other countries, which we then use as an excuse to continue attacking them, or they're idiots. They're either in on it or idiots. Either way, no, I don't think they're capable of doing it. Could it have been done better? Yes. It also shouldn't have been done in the first damn place, which was just as stupid as the way that they left.
Cajun.
Mostly going to have to agree with pretty much everybody here. I think a toddler could have done this job better. The question is, how could the withdrawal of troops been done effectively? That's not an answer. It could not have been done effectively, to Chris's point. Could it have been done more effectively? Hell yes, way more. Let's just look at the fact that we haven't lost an American troop in Afghanistan in war since February of 2020. We had a skeleton group of Marines there, 2,500, who hadn't been in combat, who hadn't lost their lives. So why the hell are we pulling out the Marines before we pull out the damn civilians? Sorry, okay? Keep my freaking strapped armed Marines over there. Get the civilians and the Afghan allies out. Then you leave. The sequence of events is very common sense. The fact that they didn't, if they were either complicit, moronic, or both, is absolutely on the table. And I'm going to go with both. they're both moronic and complicit because it's how ineffective and stupid that they run the government. So stupid that you pull out a group of Marines who had the entire country locked down without a death. You take them out first, and then you try to get the people. No. It's just, yes, it could have been done much more effectively. We probably could have lost no lives at the end of August there, potentially. And we still could have, even if it took a little longer. But I think I'm with Spike. May 1, man, we had you. The day you knew you were running for office, you should have been talking about this. Every president would have done this. Hey, look, we got Afghanistan, right? That's our first order of business. Afghanistan and COVID. We need to deal with these two things, and we have a May 1 deadline. We need to get all of our American allies and all of our Americans out, and then we'll pull our troops out no later than May 1 and be done with it.
But may I say one? I want to say because I actually ran. I didn't run for president. I ran for vice president. I remember being on a bus with Jorgensen Cohen on it and going around the country. And when I'd get asked about Afghanistan, I'd say largely what I just said. But the one thing I kept saying by the time that May deadline was set, and I forget when that was, I would say, we already have a deadline. Whoever is getting elected needs to already have a plan to get him out. Here is something like what it would look like for us. And it was a little bit less detailed than what I just said, because at the time I didn't know about the Haqqani network. I did know that the CIA, at least as recently as 2018, was giving literal pallets of guns to ISIS, which is now ISK. But the point of all that is, like Noel said, literally, if you are running for this office, you needed to already have a game plan, and it didn't need to be 6,000 pages long. It could be as simple as work to get the civilians out because you already have a deadline. Let the Taliban know that's what your plan is and that you want it to go as smoothly as possible. Stop funding the damn terrorists and get people out of there, and then they can leave. And yes, there was probably going to be an attack. At that moment when the final people are leaving, there was going to be someone that was going to take advantage of that. But you can try to reduce the amount of ancillary damage that happens as a result of it, the number of lives lost, the number of proper amount of property destroyed and everything else. You can reduce that by getting the soft targets out and then have the other people backing out at the end. And you don't have to be a military expert to say that.
You could also reduce the amount of people clinging to the side of a plane on the way out as well.
Yes.
Yeah, to
preferably
be fair,
to zero.
They did ask the Taliban to pretty please not destroy our embassy. So I mean, they said please. So I mean, it's not our fault at that point.
Literally,
here's the names of the people there. Here's the people. They beyond negotiated with terrorists. Keep in mind, whenever we talk, we gotten so used to talking about the CIA giving and the State Department and sometimes the Pentagon giving money and training and weapons to terrorists. Remember that AUMF that Chris read that said that the president can attack anyone who had anything to do with 9/11? What happens if you give millions of dollars worth of guns and advanced weaponry and training and actual money to the people who are part of the terrorist network that carried out 9/11? That would be called, they would be one of those people that should be attacked. What if they're the ones who are the ones supposed to do it? That's called treason.
Didn't they find, like, they did some report that in Syria, like 5 out of 7 Syrian nationals that we were training actually turned out to be ISIS? Can you imagine what we did in 20 years in Afghanistan?
It's insane.
5 out of 7.
Switching gears ever so slightly here, there's been a shift in foreign policy priorities with a strong emphasis now on China. Leave this as open-ended as you want. We'll start with you, Cajun. What do we do with China?
Wow, that's a web of snakes that I don't even know how to approach. I mean, what do you do with China? They've already begun. I think they were the first nation to recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government in Afghanistan. They're already creating resources and pipelines into the country. What do you do with China other than go to war with them? At this point, you have to negotiate. You have to continue to negotiate. You have to continue to try to ask them to not do the things that we see coming. You could do the Trump thing and just add tariffs everywhere. That obviously didn't help. Yeah. So I don't have an answer for that. That's That's complicated. That's complicated on so many. In what avenue? Like, right? What scenario?
What are we going to do about China, Noel?
Which part of the relationship with China do we need to address? Because the relationship as a whole, I don't know how to answer that.
Shawn, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm going to give you a specific scenario, and this is for everyone. If Taiwan gets invaded, how does the U.S. respond?
Yeah, I think you need to stay out of it. I don't know what other answer. If we're anti-interventionism, we're either anti-interventionism or we're pro-world police, right? I hate giving binary options there, but are there any other options from somebody who knows more about it than I do? You're either going to go and get in between it, or you're going to stay the hell out of it. I don't know.
David, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts kind of lead into more thoughts, and so I'm trying not to jump too far ahead. I think I disagree with Cajun. I know everyone on this panel is non-interventionism or interventionalist, and I have a tendency to think on a little bit different scale. Do you go to war with Taiwan, or do you go to war with China over Taiwan? Maybe not. But do you invest in other countries who might want to? Can you do that? Because what China is doing, from my understanding, and I'm like what Biden says, a normal Joe, like I'm just a normal guy. And even I can tell the idea that even China is pouring into countries that can't pay them back. So they're building airports and building these things on countries that don't have the wealth, the income to be actually pay them back. So what they're doing is they're basically creating a credit card system for these companies saying, pay us back just, eventually. And then they owe. And so in this sense of being like, well, China can do these things. They can build pipelines. They can build airports. They're actually investing in countries that can't really return. So basically what they return is a little bit of fealty, because now China owns an airport in your country. And so when it says, well, let's just leave China alone and let them do their thing, in 10 years, China will own half the world. And America is just going to be just rocking and rolling. So either one, we really look into defense when it comes to military, or we look into how to invest in other countries that isn't nation building, just investment. We don't have to take advantage of countries, but we need to play the smart game. There's an analogy. You never wrestle an alligator in water because that's their home. So if you're going to play China's game, play it smart. And we're going to have to play China's game because China's playing a game. And if we just, if I think of it like a chessboard, I know we're jumping into the next question, but non-interventionism is saying that I'm sitting at a chessboard with another country or with multiple. And my thing is to kind of keep my pawns all right here. You can't attack them. Well, the other board is actually moving. So if you pass on all your moves, they're just getting closer, and they're going to kill your king. They're going to take out the queen. They're going to kill your king eventually. So the idea that we don't have to participate at our size now, maybe if we were small, maybe if we were Sweden or we were something like that, not to diss on Sweden, but America, regardless of what we want it to be or not, is a bit of an empire because we kind of fell into that because freedom leads to those things. So if we're going to play this card, if we're going to have this empire, we need to do it, one, altruistically, and we need to do it smart. We have to think ahead. And so I understand China is doing their thing, and I don't want to go to war with China over Taiwan. But also, I don't like that. I mean, China's probably going to be mad at me if they know who I am. But I don't let people just move their pawns all over the board without me planning something out. And so that's my point. I don't know if that was too long or if even made sense.
No, that's great.
I don't think we're worried about time limits. Everyone should take the time to say what they need to say.
No, we are from all political sides, and we want to hear everything you guys have to say. The point of the Liberty Roundtable is to get your guys' voices out there, and I've been saying this for a while, to cross-pollinate so that your followers see other people and get those opinions out there. Spike, how should we play the game with China?
I want Chris to be able to answer first because I feel like I'm about to scorch the earth and I wouldn't want anyone to have to speak after me. So I feel it coming and I just want to give Chris a chance because it's gonna be so.
Go ahead. I will live in your shadow, sir.
Okay. So here's my take on China. First of all, the sheer gall that China has to, create all this infrastructure in poor countries and then use it as leverage and credit against them to then basically essentially take over those countries and their economy and to build an entire infrastructure network that is built around lending money to other countries and extracting their resources, while at the same time building up their military and engaging in jingoism through their state-run and chartered media with their population. Who the hell do they think they are? Us since World War II? Every single day since World War II. Here's the fact, guys. When we talk about China being aggressive in the South China Sea, it's named after them. Can you imagine if Puerto Rico, and this has happened before, if Puerto Rico decided tomorrow, no, we are our own country and we're taking all the assets that were erstwhile American assets and we're asserting ourselves, and we're going to form a military that we're going to get funding from the Chinese government to create a military that we could have otherwise never had to defend us against the invasion of the US government that has been exerting itself over Puerto Rico, with a slight difference there. Because in the case of Taiwan, that was always a part of the greater China. Whereas in the case of Puerto Rico, we actually did take that after the Spanish-American War. But it's not a perfect comparison. It's actually less charitable to us. But let's use the comparison. It's actually more charitable to us. So we go and we say, no, Puerto Rico is part of the United States and always has been. And the Chinese government basically creates a military force there and is kind of vague on whether they'll get involved. But at the same time, they and the rest of the Eastern media or Western media is constantly talking about how the US government is being just so damn aggressive in the Gulf of Mexico. That's what's happening there right now. Now, China is a threat for many other standpoints. I don't see them as a military threat because I hope that the Chinese people who think in much longer eras than we tend to, we think in TikTok time and they think in, eons, I would think that they have looked at the poison chalice that is empire and thought to themselves, maybe we should avoid that part. Now, if they haven't, good for them. They can be the next ones to suffer under crushing debt and misery for decades and generations as a result if they'd like to. I'd like to take a break from that. But if they don't want, but I'm going to assume that they don't want to, but they are a threat here. And here's why. They are a threat in terms of the fact that they are exerting their political force in things like entertainment, even in other countries, to force companies that want to do business there to not say anything bad about China, even in the US or in foreign countries, or else they aren't allowed to do business there. They are leveraging our corporatist system to make everyone be nice to them. Again, our fault. They're using our corporatist system. It's our fault Disney's so damn big. It's our fault Viacom is so damn big. It's our fault that all of our media is run by 6 or 7 corporations. That is what the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Code of Taxes and the corporate system in this country has wrought. And they're just leveraging it. So, but here's another big problem from that corporatism. Why is China so damn rich? Because for the past 2 generations, government and cronies have made it increasingly unaffordable to the point of being cost prohibitive to make things in America, to hire Americans, and to do business directly in America. Not just here, but other countries as well. And why? Because they wanted to destroy their smaller competitors and then move their base of operations, because only they could afford to do it, and make relationships with dictatorial regimes like China in other countries and use sweatshop labor to make the things with no concern for the environment, which is why so much of the greenhouse gas output is coming from China. That's American and Western corporations doing the business over there. And for all the environmentalists who thought that was a big win from your environmental agencies, that's why it's happening over there. And then what do? They use our military to protect their shipments of the stuff that they took our jobs to go and have them made over here, to bring it back here to be bought by the American consumer, who for the most part doesn't understand the swindle that just happened. And then you have one side that says that's perfectly fine, and you have another side that says, no, that's terrible. We're going to tax it. We're going to put tariffs on that so that the American consumer's paying even more for that. And not just that, if you are a company that's making a durable good or service here in the United States, and you know that you can either make your air conditioner or your refrigerator or your car here in the United States and pay this much more for every damn product you need to be able to make it, steel, microprocessors, any of the kind of materials, aluminum, even soft lumber, any of the things that you need, you're going to pay this damn tariff on it, or you just move to Canada. And not only do you pay a lower corporate tax rate, but now you don't pay that tariff anymore. Now even more jobs are gone while Americans are paying that tax. That is what you have been provided by Republicans and Democrats. And China's been laughing all the way to the bank for it. Now, in the same way that I don't want to hear a single damn thing about fighting the war on terrorism while the CIA is arming terrorists and is the main armor and trainer and funder of terrorism and genocide around the world from those very terrorist groups, which if any of us gave them a freaking nickel, we'd be in jail for treason or for conspiring with the enemy or whatever the charge is. They're robbing us to pay for it. I don't want to hear a damn thing about the war on terror until that ends. I don't want to hear a damn thing about addressing China while the corporatist, regulatory, burdensome system that has been placed here is the direct result of why they have so much power, why they have so much money, why they have so many jobs in the first place. Dismantle all of that. Make it so that American labor can be affordable again, so that American labor is desirable again, because now that leads to the problem of Americans not wanting, no one wants to hire them. We've only recently started having job issues because they told everyone to stay home. Prior to that, good luck getting a good job. Why? Supply and demand. The demand for American labor was super low because it was way cheaper elsewhere, and therefore the supply of Americans looking for a decent job was super high. That's a glut. Remove all of that, and you fixed all of the problems related to joblessness and poverty and all the ancillary social things that come from that: addiction, abuse, spousal abuse, suicide, mental health issues, educational issues, issues of marginalization of poor people. Get rid of all that shit. And now you fix that problem. But the other problem that you fixed is that now you don't have China and other dictatorial regimes making tens of trillions of dollars on the backs of what should have been able to be American labor. And that's not nationalism. Trade with whoever you want, make it wherever you want to, but stop putting your thumb on the scale so it can't be done here, because we deserve that. I shouldn't say we deserve that because we're being robbed for it. The situation that we have is as a direct result of the crony system that has been imposed at every aspect starting here, and they're just leveraging it. So no, we shouldn't get involved in Taiwan. If an American wants to go there and fight for Taiwan, then go and fight for Taiwan, and we should remove any restrictions on anyone who wants to go and fight for damn Taiwan. Go fight for Taiwan. Go fight for Hong Kong for that matter. Remove Proposition 6867 so that Cuban Americans can go and help the Cuban people without risking being arrested and put in prison by the Coast Guard. Get rid of that. Get rid of all these things and let people be free to do what they want. And when you do that, you will watch these dictatorships fall apart and implode because they're built on the nonsense right from here.
What he said.
After a speech like that, you should all go check your fire extinguishers because that shit was straight fire.
Chris, do you have anything to follow that up with?
Yeah, I do.
I feel bad now.
See, he does this all the time. Like, that's the entire party is what Spike Cohen says. And then there's like us who like have to try and say things and we're like, legalize weed. But no. But in all seriousness, my stance would be, the federal government should not be getting involved in the affairs of China. They suck at our affairs. Why do we think that they should be involved with any other nation? And I think, honestly, and here's the one thing I think that we should really focus on, like, for long term, is repealing the ITAR, which is the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. So it basically regulates the arms and munitions we bring in and out of the country. And the one thing I would guarantee you that the United States, and I'll promise this, like, I will throw any amount of money in this. The United States is far superior at manufacturing firearms than any other nation in the world, mostly because more Americans buy guns than the entirety of the rest of the world, right? Like, there's entire nations with militaries with, like, our military didn't have as many firearms as the American civilian does.
Close.
So what we can do is go back to the old school method of where the civilian market makes firearms, and then the military is like, hey, we like that, we're going to buy some of those. Well, what can happen then is Taiwan can say, holy crap, those Americans, you see that new machine gun they rolled out last week? We're going to buy 20,000 of those, and they're going to have the dopest machine guns they could ever buy, because now it's not regulated by the ITAR, and they can buy whatever they want to. Americans can buy whatever they want to. Japan is not a poor country by any means. Who do you think is watching China the closest? Because there's this little thing that happened during World War II, and there's this massive genocide from Japan into China. They unleashed biological weapons. They created the bubonic plague and turned it loose in Chinese villages and cities. Who do you think is nervous right now? The country over here on the other side of the ocean that we know for a fact that China cannot get to. Their aircraft carriers struggle to make it past Taiwan. If you bought anything from China, you know it's probably being held together by hopes and prayers and chopsticks, all right? So the fact that we think that we're in danger here in the United States by a bunch of guys from China, like, I'm dead ass serious. Like, the Japanese at the pinnacle of their empire didn't want this smoke. Like, they were forced to attack a single tiny island in the Pacific. What makes us think that China looked at that and said, oh yeah, we want that too? Yeah, they might make it through California. They ain't got no guns. They've got like those goofy ARs, whatever. But I guarantee you, they make it to like Arizona and further east. They don't want that smoke. They know that. They know they don't. They definitely don't want Alaska. Are you kidding me? Like, 2 Alaskans take on the entire Chinese Navy and it's over. So what we need to do is win the long game by selling munitions to people in the Asia Pacific region. Let Hong Kong start buying stuff. Start selling guns illegally into Hong Kong. Start selling guns to Japan. Start selling them to Taiwan. Because, by God, I mean, they're going to want them. And if they buy them from us and we're not giving them the money to buy them like we do with Israel, we're making money off of this. And then Americans get better guns because now these companies that have sold these arms and munitions have money for R&D. So it worked. It's a literal free market solution to solving this problem. Yeah, maybe Taiwan loses, but that's not something I'm supposed to be willing to spend another 20 years and the life of my son to go fight another damn war that nobody wants. If Taiwan's not willing to fight for themselves, then why the fuck should we? I mean, why should we? Sell them what we want to, and if they fail, they fail. That's tough love. That's the way of the world. That's what we did for the most part, the early parts of World War I and World War II. We were selling munitions. Why do we care? Like, why do we care what China's going to do to us? Because they're not going to do shit. They're not. They've got nothing they can do. Thank you.
Well, you definitely
Can
more gasoline on that fire.
Can I jump in?
Thanks for coming to my gun talk.
I knew you'd bring up guns.
Can I talk to Chris real quick and
Absolutely.
as well? I totally agree. I think there's a few things I'll add to the conversation. Let's say I'm not going to just disagree right off the bat. I think Chris is absolutely right. I think the fire that Spike came with is absolutely true. But we also are talking about a particular kind of warfare. And when you say, like, what can China do? China, they're not going to get past Japan. China has actually already done a ton. But if we're looking at, instead of just regular warfare, think of like 4th generational warfare. They have affected our culture to the point where John Cena is speaking Mandarin on TikTok. So there's something going on here. Leave China alone. What are they going to do? Let them take Taiwan? No, I don't think so. And we saw this when it came to the idea of Hong Kong. Like, we watched China plow over Hong Kong. And what did we do? I listened to an NPR thing where they're like, well, China's kind of racist towards Hong Kong's, but, equality. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, we set that. It's the same thing with Afghanistan. You don't prop someone up and then kick the ladder out and say, stand on your own for the most part. So Spike's right. Don't show up if you're not going to show up. That's my point. If you're going to show up and pretend like you're the police of the world, then don't just leave mid-beating. Don't go, well, I signed him a ticket, let him kill him. That's garbage. And that's not how government should go. So if you're going to play the card like America does play, then remove the whole deck. Don't pretend like, well, we're not gonna stand up for Taiwan, but we also are gonna make sure Disney complies. Like, we need to pick a side, because, and I'm with everybody on this. Government's ruining this entire concept. Like, there's something going on. That's my thing. I don't think the U.S. is going to invade China, or not invade China, back up Taiwan. I don't think they will, because why would they? Why would they? Because we've helped China all the way down the line so far. Why would we stop them from taking? We didn't stop them from Hong Kong. Why would we? And so when people go, well, we should defend Taiwan, and everyone's going, no, leave them. That's what the government's doing. That's what they're doing. And I'm not one to just quickly, whatever the government's doing, I'm kind of sketchy of, but I kind of am. So when the government goes, yeah, think about Taiwan, that's kind of where our focus should be, but don't pay attention to Disney or Viacom or any of these other corporations. But yeah, Taiwan, we should show up with troops there. But John Cena's cool. Let's just go with that. And so there's something wrong there. And that's all I'm saying. If we're not going to play the warfare, we don't want guns, we don't want people in boots on the ground, but we definitely need to pay attention to what we're giving China. Like Spike said, like, we're literally handing them everything. We're putting the thumb on the American citizens and their taxpayer money to make China do the thing they do best, which is figure out a way to, even though they don't have a strong military, figure out a way to get around, and they have. And we're watching them do it, and we're just sitting by going, let Taiwan, Taiwan China is actually West Taiwan, but who really cares? So they're the same thing. So is Hong Kong. We just let that happen? We're just going to let this happen. We're just going to let it happen. Because if it happens in Hong Kong, it's going to happen in Japan. It's going to happen further along. So if we're not going to play the warfare game, let's try to play the cultural one and get all the Americans going, hey, this whole thing that we, the British left Hong Kong and they were like, hey, you guys have freedoms now, but we're going to give you back over to China. And maybe China will kind of uphold this thing. And then they didn't. And then we're going, but they will next time. Is garbage. It's not true. And I think at least if we're going to play, we go cultural, because I think that's the power move in this.
You're 100% correct that we need to be playing the cultural game, because that's what China has no interest in getting into asymmetrical warfare in the United States, right? Like, I mean, the gun behind every blade of grass, it's times 1,000. Like, I think U.S. civilian gun owners make up, if you combine them all together, make up more people and definitely more guns than like every military combined, or some ridiculous statistic like that. You're talking about tens. The top 10 militaries. You're talking like over 100 million people with guns in their homeland, and we see how people fight when they're fighting for their homeland. Yes, we have been made docile enough to let our government tell us whether we can go outside if we're vaccinated yet. But in terms of a foreign country coming in and fight between the U.S. military and the just us, the people, they don't want that, and they lose their biggest trading partner. So it's stupid for them to do it. They're not going to do it. What they're going to do is what they're continuing to do, which is growing their prestige, using the money that they're getting because of our stupid regulatory structures we have in this country on manufacturing and on basically all business, everything from people making cars down to people braiding hair is regulated to the point of absurdity, where you either engage in the black market or just don't do it at all, or become some crony extension of the U.S. government. Of course, they're going to prosper in that. So I say it's two things. Number one is what David was talking about to an extent, that there needs to be, our focus needs to be, and this is not just the government, because the government sucks at everything. They're terrible. Us as Americans and us as a people who want to be free need to be talking about how, this is not freedom. This is not okay. And no, it's not, we're going to go and fight, but anyone who is having their rights and their lives infringed upon in this manner, like the people of China, the people of China are, yes, the people of Hong Kong, yes, the people of Taiwan, the people of China, the way that they're being treated, the Uyghurs, everyone else, the way that everyone in that country is being treated. And in many countries like that's wrong. And here's a better way to do it. And then here's step 2, show them how to do it, because we're not free. Are we better off than them? Yes, we're 7 years behind them. Or if at the rate that Australia is going, if we start pacing like that, we're 3 years behind them. Whatever, great. We're implementing some shit here too. I mean, you look at the vaccine mandates they're talking about, which is going to become the next thing mandate. They already have the system in place. So let's show them what freedom is. Then we can actually talk like non-hypocrites about it when we're wagging our fingers at everyone. And then the other part of that is, again, defund it. stop giving tens of trillions of dollars and tens of millions of jobs that would be well-paid people, possibly even union workers here, but definitely well-paid and well-compensated people with a gainful employment, and instead is sweatshop labor. It's not even like it's enriching them over there. I mean, yes, they have more of a middle class by their standard than they used to have, but it's not like they're getting, like the average Chinese person's getting rich. They do far better in a situation where we had free and open trade both here and there, right? So focus on that. Let's clean our own room first. You know, I'm channeling Jordan Peterson. Don't go and do anything until you make your bed. Like, let's go and like fix our shit and fix these problems here. And then A, we actually have any business telling anyone else to do. And B, we'll have fixed a lot of the problems, or at least greatly ameliorated the damage that's happening as a result of that.
The other thing too is, if we want to win the culture war, we show that how much better a free culture is than China is. And it's like what Spike was saying. You know, I want to say that it was China, but there was a meeting at the UN, and the US had like been harassing China about how unfree their people are, and then they brought up well, don't your cops beat people to death in the street for nothing? And then the US ambassador had nothing to say. What do you say with that? You're like, well, yeah, it's in the news. Now, to be fair, the Chinese authorities absolutely do that all the time, but they have media blackout. But what we have to do is we have to show that we're better than that, stop all these problems that we have, and let Japan, who is right there close to them, because Japan's going to side with us. Like they want our style of freedom over the authoritarian style of the Chinese, mostly because they are, like as I said before, scared of the Chinese. But let them like leak out this information about how bad it is in China, like they've been doing with the Uyghur Muslims and these things, and show people the entirety of the truth of what is going on in China, how bad it is to live there. And part of the problem is a lot of that's been swept under the rug by, as Spike had said earlier, the corporatism. You know, these companies don't want to advertise how bad it is there because they're like, well, we can't do business with China. But if there's none of this government control and there's none of those systems of power that exist, these corporations will make money from Americans to show how bad it is in China. And that's how you win it. You show them that being genocided, being systematically murdered by a government is not a cool thing. And that's that. I mean, there's no group of Americans who I can possibly think of outside of some of the most radical racists that were like, yeah, that thing, the Uyghur Muslims in China, that was a great thing. Nobody's saying that. So if we can show more stuff like that without government control and let Japan start fuddling that stuff in, and we sell them guns as a trade, I mean, I see the culture war winning.
Yeah, but you need the media to cover kind of stuff, right? So the vast majority of mainstream, or not even mainstream media anymore, internet really is mainstream media, but corporate media, mostly ran by the left and the Democrats for the most part, and Fox News is much better. They're not going to cover this stuff. They didn't cover the Uyghur stuff because they don't want the Biden administration to look bad. So it's hard to win a culture war when 60 to 65% of the country are not even realizing that there is an issue to be had there. And that's an issue. That's a big problem that I have. Yeah, we can cover it here in our sect, as we do cover everything, criticize both left and the right. But if 60% of Americans don't even know what's happening with the Uyghurs and how oppressive the Chinese government is because they are supporting the Chinese government, then that's an impossible cultural war to win until we can break that barrier.
Well, guys, I'm going to segue into our next question, and I'm going to add on to it as well. Let's talk about non-interventionism. It's already been brought up. The founders supported it, but after Pearl Harbor, it became very unpopular. Explain what non-interventionism is to you and why we should reconsider it, and then how should we apply it to other countries besides China and Afghanistan? Where else do we need this right now? David, do you want to take that one first?
I appreciate you putting me first. That's fantastic, because I think I might have the only opinion where non-interventionism doesn't sound nuanced enough for us to play inside the world. So I'll start off. I do like the idea of non-interventionism when it comes to a country, not just getting involved in other countries because of whatever, military industrial complex, whatever money we can make from something like that. But like I said earlier, if we are an empire, which we are, regardless of whether we want to be or not, and we're on the stage playing the same game with all the other players, to say that we're not going to play is dumb. Now, what we can do is think about how we play. And so it's not just moving, military around the world to kind of get what our benefit is, like what we want out of our participation in the global situation with everyone in play. I still think the idea that I think non-interventionism, what most people want is we just don't want to start wars that we don't need to, especially when it comes to like the AUMF, where they're like, well, any terrorist. I mean, look at us now. They're targeting Americans because Grandma walked into the Capitol. And so there's some issues that we might have with that, but to completely remove ourselves and be isolationists as far as country, which I don't think anyone on this room may assume. I'm just going drastics here. To be isolationists and say, America is only America, and America first, and we're not going to pay attention to anything that's going on around us, is dangerous, because I think we have a responsibility, whether or not we want it or not. The power, to go Spider-Man on it, with this power, we have a responsibility. Now, what I do think is I think the government has squandered that responsibility and destroyed it and has not lived up to what they should have. And I think when the founding fathers were like, we're non-interventionalists, they also were kind of winking an eye at France, who intervened to help independence come. So whether they were like, we don't want this to happen again, so we don't want any other country to be interventionist. So we want to pursue a global economy where no one is intervening in other countries. I think they did that because they understood the idea of what was sacred that they had. But they also used other countries to help them win their independence. So it's a little bit of a gray area. I'd like to hear what everyone else has to say about it. I'm a little bit not sure how I personally feel about it. And I think that's okay. So let's hear what everyone else has to say.
Chris, what do you think?
So I'm going to say that non-interventionism is it. So I understand my boy Teddy Roosevelt was an isolationist, but I love the ideology of speak softly, carry a big stick, right? It's the idea of that we can talk to you, but if you mess with us, we will defend ourselves. It's not we carry what is it, 48 nuclear powered aircraft carriers, and we patrol every coastal region of the entire planet. I think we can usher in, to use our economy and use our ability to speak without having to put boots on ground. I don't think non-interventionism means that we just watch genocide happen. There are other ways to quote unquote intervene with things, but it doesn't have to be at the federal level. We have, the Red Cross. The Americans donate more money to charity than any other nation in the world. The Red Cross does a lot of good in a lot of really bad nations that I would never want to see the U.S. military be involved in. Mostly because the U.S. government as a whole just sucks at everything they do. The idea that the government itself should be getting involved is a poor idea. So what we should look forward to doing is using our economy to promote these ideas of like, hey, if you're free and you stop oppressing people, this is what kind of wealth you can amass for your nation. And I don't know of a single nation that the United States has provided freedom, quote unquote freedom, to that wasn't already free before its invasion. Now, if you look at all of Europe, before and after World War II, all the nations that we liberated and quote unquote gave freedom to, they were already free before we got there. It's just they became unfree when the Germans got there. And once again, the Germans invaded because of Hitler. And the reason Hitler became popular was because of the immense debt that the United States and the other world leaders placed on Germany after World War I. And then the reason the Japanese hated us during World War II is because we shunned them from the table at the end of World War I. So once again, it was our direct government involvement in these things that caused problems in other nations. We can speak, we can say, hey, look, these are bad things. We do not promote this as free people. But any direct involvement, like doing anything directly to stop anything, has never benefited anybody, not once. Even the genocide in Somalia, we were in Somalia for what, 8 months, 18 months, something like that. And the millions and millions of dollars of weapons that we left behind were then taken and used against those people. So the idea that we have to be involved in any way, it doesn't work. It's never worked. The United States has never provided freedom to anyone except for the rich cronies and corporations and the cronies in DC. That's the only people it's given real ultimate freedom to, because you want to talk about like unalienable freedom, be worth millions or billions of dollars. You can literally build a spaceship and go to whatever planet you want to. That's freedom that the United States is providing right now with the government that we have. What we should be looking to do is providing that level of freedom to every individual American, not just the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks that can go to Mars as soon as we skull fuck this planet into oblivion because of corporatism, but the ability for all Americans to be free at the base level and provide that freedom to anyone who wants it. Give them the framework, show them how to be free. Don't show, cops beating people to death in the streets. Show people how to be free. That's the best way to provide freedom. Lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. And right now, we need to start doing a lot more leading and a lot less following, because I don't even know who we'd be following. We're the last bastion of freedom on the planet. True, unbridled freedom. We're the only nation with negative rights. And we have to start leading this charge for freedom. Give people the blueprints. Give people the manual. And it's right here. This is a pocket-sized Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and amendments. This right here should have been our framework. This should be the guide and the roadmap that people need. That's all they need. And we lead, and that's how we free the rest of the world.
Yes. Cajun, what do you say?
So what is non-interventionism? And I guess the easiest way for me to put this would be not to intervene in hostile foreign affairs that aren't a direct defense to our nation, right? If it's not in direct defense of Americans in CONUS, then there is no reason that our military should intervene into hostile territory. Now, if we want to bleed off into the argument and talk and debate about genocide, there's multiple options on the table, one of which for our pro-war friends would be, you don't even have to step foot in the country anymore, man. They can launch drone strikes and wipe out entire militaries from Miami, Florida. And then you could just leave it and let the people of the country figure out where to go from there. I'm not saying that that's my answer to that. I'm saying that's an answer without putting boots on the ground in foreign countries where we have no business being, that are not directly hostile to American citizens right here in this country. And you are not going to find that. Really, there is no country on earth that could just walk right into this country and try to take it over. So you're going to be hard pressed to try to find a reason to put boots on the ground in any area that is hostile. Now, we have bases all over the world, right, where we have open exchange and commerce with their countries, and we're helping build their economies. And there's no real hostile threat to our American troops there. So I don't see a huge price. It's not like you're going to reverse that tomorrow. That's not going to happen. Those bases are still going to be there. So to me, that's not a conversation to be had. We can still have that commerce with those countries, with our bases in their countries. There's no hostile threat. But when we're going and actively creating extremists and enemies in foreign countries where we sold them the weapon, the whole discussion about, well, where are the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? They were there. We sold them to them. We know they were there. Where they're at now, I don't know. But we know they were there because we gave them to them. So we should have never been there in the first place. We armed the very enemies. We trained the very enemies. We're still doing it today. As we're leaving Afghanistan, we're still training terrorists. We're still training enemies. We're creating extremists. We're creating hostile actors in foreign countries by direct foreign intervention in affairs that we needed not be in the first place. Again, if you're talking about somebody like Saddam Hussein with mass graves of women and children, 3,000, you could walk in there and walk right back out. We're America. I'm not advocating for that. I'm saying it's a possibility. But the fact that we stayed there for decades shows that the intention there was never actually to be honorable. The intention there was not to defend the people that couldn't defend themselves. The intention was absolutely to gain resources from that country, and we could capitalize upon those resources and just to create more war, create more contracts, global contracts around the earth to feed off of and to make money. It's all about the money. So foreign interventionism, when it comes down to what we have one obligatory duty as the U.S. military, that is to protect the United States of America and its citizens, and we're more armed than they are. So there's no reason we should be intervening in foreign wars of hostile territory just because of whatever they put across the TV, and the people eat it up. Let's be honest. Whatever excuse they give you, the people are going to say, yes, let's do that, right? Because that make, like David said earlier, a lot of people still feel comfort in the safety. That it's not real safety. It's false sense of security because we're creating the very enemies that we're telling people that we're going to defend against. But the fact of the matter is there is not a country on this, there's not a military on this planet that's going to step foot in this country and try to handle this smoke that would come to them. Not one. So what are we doing?
I love it.
I love all of your passion. That's why we had the four of you on. I just wanted to take a moment real quick before Spike lights us the hell up and tell you guys, follow every single one of these guys. They are amazing. Pardon Will is the name of David's podcast. It is podcast only, no video. And then you guys obviously know Noel and Spike and Bootleg. Shawn?
Yeah, thank you. Spike, I have a feeling that you have some strong opinions on this topic. Let's hear what those might be.
You're muted, Spike.
Spike, you're muted.
It's so far he burnt his mic.
No, I was saying I could go either way with it, honestly. Like, this is kind of like here's the thing. First of all, let me preface all this by saying, how we talk about that government agencies are terrible at what they do. So, Health and Human Services, the CDC, the FDA, the Department of Education, Housing and Urban Development, the Border Patrol and ICE, Department of Homeland Security. These are all they do terrible job. They waste a bunch of money. They usually make whatever thing they were supposed to make better worse. At the very least, they don't help, and they waste a bunch of money in the process. That's also true of the Pentagon. And it's interesting because we often, for a myriad of reasons, first of all, we are raised on jingoism from a very, very early age. We are told that, the military is what protects us, that we're safe because of the military. And it's certainly, it's in the Constitution that we're supposed to, actually, we're not supposed to have a standing military. But in the case of being, at threat, that the government has the power to call a military to protect us. All it just constant feeding of this idea behind, because we love our loved ones who are in the military, then we have to love the military. Well, I'm sure I have loved ones that are in all sorts of federal agencies that I don't support that actual agency or what their mission is or what they're doing. I don't agree with the founders on many different things. Certainly the biggest thing I disagree with them on, besides many of them had slaves, is the fact that they replaced, after the revolution, they replaced the Articles of Confederation, which was an actual good faith attempt to have a limited government, and they illegally replaced it with the Constitution, which was an act of treason against the American government. Anyway, we're past that now. That's now the law of the land. What I do agree with them on, overwhelmingly, was that we should be non-interventionist and we should even have a discussion about whether or not we even need a standing military. And here's why. When government has a thing, they come up with reasons to use it. and to expand it. We see that with everything. What's the popular phrase? There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. Well, that's true of the military too. That's true of these wars that were just for one purpose too. When you give them power to create a fighting force that they get to set the rules for when it's used, it's always going to be used, and it's always going to be expanded, and it's always going to bring in more people, and it's always going to feed more and more of this cultural idea that it's a good idea to join up and protect our country and protect our freedoms, which for some reason are in Afghanistan and Iraq and now Yemen and all these other countries. Now, the common refrain that I hear, the two biggest responses that I hear when I talk about the fact that the US government, at the very least, if it has a standing military, should have it here, making sure that we are protected, and that we possibly need to consider, does anyone actually want to go to war with 100 million gun owners and lose their biggest trading partner at the same time? Does anyone really, really, really want that? Is there anyone who could even try to do that, much less want to do it? The two common refrains I get are, but what about Pearl Harbor? And of course, but what about the Holocaust? And usually because I'm Jewish, but you're Jewish, what about the Holocaust? Let's talk about those things. Again, as Chris had mentioned, both those things, World War II was an extension of World War I. In fact, the Cold War was an extension of World War I, where a single leader of a single country was killed by a Serbian guy on my birthday, it's June 28th, it's funny, and he was killed. And then, guess what? Everyone went to war because this country had an alliance with this country, and this country had an alliance with this country, and this country had an alliance with this country, and this country, blah, 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 blah. And now everyone's at war. We called it a world war, which shows just how Eurocentric we were back then. It was Europe was at war and the Ottoman Empire. Europe and the Ottoman Empire were at war, basically. And the United States, Woodrow Wilson, was nipping at the bit to be able to get into this thing. He wanted it so bad. A lot of people forget that we lost more American service people. We lost more young men in World War I than we did in World War II. And for what? Because it wasn't the Nazis back then. It was the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire versus the British Empire and the French Empire and the American Empire. Okay, well, great. Now our side won. Wonderful. Fantastic. The debt that came from that, not to mention, by the way, the entire mess in the Middle East is because of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where the British and French sat down and carved up the entire Middle East, started shoving people that hadn't lived there in years. And yes, I'm talking about the Jews, started shoving people in there because they didn't want them in their countries and created that whole mess there, right? There were Jews that were living in what was called Palestine at the time during the Ottoman Empire. No problem whatsoever. Okay. They were coming there. They were buying pieces of land. They were living among the Arabs and the Druids and the Bedouins and everything else. They're nothing, perfectly fine. No problems whatsoever. And then here comes Europe carving it up into artificial countries that no one there wanted, and dividing tribes and handing off land to the tribes that were the most loyal to them, who are now the people running the country or the region, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Emiratis, and everyone else gets the Jordanians, the Hashemite crown, everyone else gets crapped on. Okay. Now back to Europe. So the debt that came from that put Germany in such a terrible situation, that coupled with the Great Depression, which wasn't just happening here, it was a global depression, which, by the way, was triggered by central banks and tariffs, people that were trade wars, and it destroyed the economy. So as a result of that, now what happens is Germany wants blood. And they need, what do they need? They need a scapegoat and they need a strongman. They got it. Their scapegoat was the Jews and their strongman was Hitler. Now, you can say that's all fine and good, but what happens? Let's say, you become president in the 1930s when all this stuff's starting to pop off. You can't go back in time and kill baby Woodrow Wilson like you promised to do when you were running for vice president. So now what are you going to do? Okay, great. Let's look at what happened there. Let's talk about Pearl Harbor first. Do you think that Japan said, hey, America, fuck them. Let's go fight them? No. What happened was that the U.S. government was engaging in two things: the Lend-Lease plan that was where the U.S. government was giving equipment, lending equipment and money to the British to fight against the Germans, and also to fight against the Japanese, and to a lesser extent the Italians, but the Japanese mostly, and the Germans in the Pacific and in Europe, and also, we were engaging in blockades and embargoes and sanctions against Japan, and they couldn't operate without being able to have access to rubber and gas and oil and all the things that they needed, and metal and stuff like that. And so the U.S. government provoked that. And there's some suggestions and some reports that that they actually had intelligence, and they actually had signals intelligence that the Japanese were there, and they sat on it because they wanted that big attack to happen so they could say, we need to get into this war. But let's say it wasn't. Let's say they didn't know. That was triggered by them. You go, okay, fine. Okay, great. Pearl Harbor, fine. The Holocaust, 6 million dead Jews, something like 8 million dead Gentiles killed in concentration camps and rounded up and murdered, and all the subjugation that happened there. You would just sit there and let that happen to them? No, I'd have let them come here instead of turning away the boats. Hitler wanted them out of the country, especially the Jews. Now, I'm not saying Hitler was a good guy by any stretch of the imagination. I'm saying that if for no other reason than cost effectiveness, he would have rather just kicked him out and sent him somewhere else and tried to, than to have to now round him up and kill them and use all the resources for that. He was putting them in work camps, but before that, and even during that, he was sending some off as a pilot to see, well, will you take these Jews? We don't want them. Do you want them? There was a boat called the USS St. Louis, I believe, and it was filled with Jews who were being sent there by, they left to come to the United States, and they were kept in, I don't remember if it was Cuba or Puerto Rico or in Florida. They were harbored there, and they were told they'd be able to get there, and FDR turned them away. Do you know why he turned them away? He said, well, there might be some Nazis among them. We can't trust them. The Jews. And they were sent back, and many of them died in the Holocaust. I think most of them died in the Holocaust. Now imagine being on a boat, and you're there for weeks, days, weeks, however long it took, and you're thinking, oh, I'm so glad to be out of there. I'm so glad. I've heard such great things about America. Some of them had been to America before. We're finally going to be free. And they get here, and they're stuck there for days, and then they're told, no, you're going back, and they're going to probably kill you. And they did. And that didn't just happen in the US, it happened in the UK, it happened in other countries as well, where they were sent, and those countries, we don't want Jews. Are you kidding me? The whole Zionism thing, the whole sending Jews to what was up until that point Palestine, was to just get rid of the Jews. Like, we're not going to round them up and kill them, but we certainly don't want them here. So no, at no point was war necessary. Imagine if we instead had said, hey, we'll take those Jews and the Roma, gypsies, the homosexuals, the degenerates, the Catholics, the Russia, whoever else you're rounding up, we'll take them. Yeah, send them here. We're good. Let's do it. We'll take them all. We could have done that. And in the midst of the what's happening in Japan, we could have stayed the hell out of that. Or we could have talked to them about what they were doing, again, not as provocateurs and not as people that were helping their enemy, but just as an uninterested third party, and be like, hey, this thing that you're doing in Nanking, this stuff that you're doing, that's unacceptable. And we're going to let American people know what's happening there. And we're not going to want to trade with you. That's not going to go well. And if there are people there that you don't want there, maybe send them over here, right? There are ways to handle this. Would it be perfect? Would there never be a genocide again? Would people never die again? Things are going to happen. There are going to be people that die. There are going to be people that get rounded up and killed. It's happening right now. In fact, right now, the biggest one is being funded by the U.S. military with the help of the Saudi government and Al-Qaeda. So yeah, no, it's always going to happen. But the idea that we need to keep a standing army who is going to come up with a reason to keep itself going and prop along this gigantic military industrial complex on the off chance that it might inadvertently help someone in the process, I don't see it. I don't see it. Not when its use is what leads to these things. Because again, had we not gotten involved in World War I, had we instead been like, guys, a person was killed, a person, and I think it's like a leader was killed. Why is the entire world fighting over this? Maybe cooler heads could have prevailed and none of this would have happened, or at least not as bad as it did happen. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you for that, Spike. Chris, I wanted to thank each and every one of you for coming on. I had this idea several months ago. I never thought I'd actually be doing it, but I really, really think our community needs this. Thanks, David, for being the odd man out. I'm going to let all of you guys go because we are 30 minutes over time, and Chris totally called it.
Yeah, and I just wanted, again, to thank everyone and mention that Muddy Waters of Freedom will be on tomorrow night on Muddy Waters with Spike and Matt Wright. And until next time, be free, everyone.
Thanks, guys.